Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to 2022 series of Black Voices Sociology of Media. And today we have the privilege of speaking with an emerging scholar, and that is Ren Perkins, and he is a Quandamooka man with connections to the Minjerribah, which is part of North Stradbroke Island. He has also connections with and I'm bad with pronunciation, so here I go. Cherbourg, please correct me if I'm wrong, Ren.
Yeah, good job.
Okay, getting there. And Eidsveld. Oh boy, they are difficult words.
Yeah.
Both on Wakka Wakka country. Ren has been involved in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education for many years. He is passionate about connecting and contributing to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities through education. Ren is currently enrolled at the University of Queensland, undertaking a PhD through the School of Education. His thesis is Indigenous Teachers' Voices on Why They Stay in the Profession. So timely at this period of complexity that we're living through the pandemic. And I just wanted to also highlight an important contribution to educational scholarship is that Ren has just contributed to a book chapter, and he's co-authored with Beth Madsen and Shay Marnie, who I absolutely adore. 2021 Critical Selection of Curriculum Materials Tools for Educators. And we will be putting that in the bio. So I'm encouraging every pre-service teacher listening, academic scholars in teaching of education, humanities, and VCE, sociology and history, to purchase a copy, because this is so important. And without further ado, let us now take a journey and have a listen to the story that Ren will tell us about his wonderful life. And I'll also, Ren, if we have the privilege of you, please doing a welcome to country, we greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ricky, and thanks for having me. I feel really honoured to be here and just sharing, my journey so far. Just as custom for me and our mob, I'm a Quandamooka man, as Ricky said, living on Quandamooka country, so I feel very, very privileged. And as Ricky said, you pronounced it beautifully, Ricky, Minjerribah, so North Stradbroke Island. But I also have connections to Wakka Wakka through both my grandmother and my grandfather. Before I go on, I just want to acknowledge country and just acknowledge wherever you may be and the country that you're on. And as I said, for me, I'm on Quandamooka country. And I also want to pay my respects to our elders, both past and present, and just acknowledge, I suppose, the wonderful contributions that they have all made. And it's on their shoulders that, myself and Ricky and others can follow. So yeah, as I said, my grandmother, she was born on Cherbourg, which is an Aboriginal reserve northwest of Brisbane, about 3.5 hours by road. And she was one of 10 children. She was the eldest, so helped raise the others and was looked up to by the others. She was trained to be a domestic servant for white families, and the other siblings would often go and visit her in the family home. And later on, her and my great-grandmother and some of the other siblings were moved to Stradbroke, to Quandamooka, to Minjerribah, out to a place called Minjerribah Springs, and onto a settlement at Stradbroke, and continued to live there. Hence my connection to and identified with Quandamooka. And on my grandfather's side, he was born at Eidsveld. Ricky, you nailed that pronunciation. So Eidsveld is central Queensland, a fair way north of Brisbane, and it is on Wakka Wakka country. We don't know a lot about his family, his parents. We know that he was raised with he had, I think there was about 6 or 7 of them. He was the only son. He had all sisters, and they lived and worked on a cattle farm up near Eidsveld, so working for white pastoralists. But we're slowly starting to find records of his service for Australia in World War II. To serve for Australia in the armed forces, he had to apply for an exemption certificate. And some of you who may have done pre-service teaching courses might know a little bit about exemption certificates, but that's a whole nother subject. But a lot of Aboriginal people, to apply for land, to marry, to leave the reserve, would have to apply for an exemption certificate. So we're finding out more about his family. But up until then, the only records I really had were through the police records, and movements of Aboriginal people, from place to place, like from Eidsveld to Cherbourg, and, if there was a dispute between families. So the movement of Aboriginal people was quite rampant in Queensland, as it was in other states and territories. And families were torn apart, and were relocated. So there are police records of my grandfather, his siblings, and his parents, and where he was born and where he was raised. So that's a bit about me. And as Ricky said, I'm currently doing my PhD. I'm hopefully at the back end, my research is looking at what keeps Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teachers in the profession. So, and I'm supervised by the wonderful Dr. Marnie Shea, who, like me, had some experience working with flexi schools throughout Australia, and also Professor Peter Renshaw is my co-supervisor, and just wonderful people to learn from, and there's I suppose, I don't know if I'm going off on a tangent, Ricky, but through Dr. Marnie Shea, we've organised, as everyone knows, we're in the middle of a pandemic. So it was hard for us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academics just to stay connected, and we needed that connection. So Marnie organised a virtual yarning group where we could meet on Zoom. And so predominantly they were Marnie's students, and we would come together, and it would be on the premise of a reading. It could be a Nakata reading or whatever, and then we would just yarn. So very rarely did we look at the reading, but it was about our needs as Indigenous academics working in a white Western institution, and some of the challenges that we had, and just with writing and dealing with the institution. And so it's just become a yarning circle, and I suppose being part of that has really helped all of us flourish and feel supported. And part of that is where we've co-written a paper a couple of years ago now, where it was about how we, as a group of Indigenous academics, came together through COVID, and we used, I don't know if you've heard of him, Ricky, but Uncle Ernie Grant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it talks about 8 ways. So we use that as a framework for our paper, and about a group of Indigenous academics coming together and yarning. So that's, I suppose, my journey to date. Just a bit of background. I'm a father. I've got 3 daughters. I'm also a brother. I've got 2 sisters, so surrounded by strong women, Aboriginal women. And I suppose that for me, my father really didn't talk about his culture very much. Just that fear of putting your head up and identifying as Aboriginal. But we always knew we were Aboriginal. Growing up and applying for ab study to go to university, and the 3 of us, me and my 2 sisters, have all gone through university. So I became a teacher. My sister is a nurse, and my other sister is a mathematician. So we all recognise the importance of education for us and what it's provided, the privileges that it's given us and our family, and how we can contribute to this society, to Australia, as strong Indigenous people.
And tell me a little bit about your journey, Ren, into the teaching profession. What was it that made you decide that you wanted to enter the teaching profession?
Do you want the truth, or I can?
No, truth telling is always the way.
Okay, I was living in a place called Coonabarabran, which is out western New South Wales, and I hadn't finished my degree. I was a pretty poor student, and so I was continuing externally. And at the time, I was working in a coffee shop, so full time managing a coffee shop. The guy I was working for, I'm pretty old, so in the old days of CES.
I know that, yes. There was my generation.
Yeah. So there was an employment program to employ Aboriginal people. So the owner, basically employed me for the government's, provided subsidised my and then he sold the business, and the new owners kept me on, but then the subsidy stopped. It was only like a 2-year, and then they said that I'd been stealing or something, and so they got rid of me. And so then through the original owner, who was working for, again, showing my age, in New South Wales or throughout Australia, we had a program called CDEP.
Yes, do remember that. It's very big in the 80s. Yeah,
you remember the acronym, Ricky?
Yes. So go for it.
Community Development Employment Program. So basically, it was for Aboriginal people. It was work for the dole.
That's it.
And so they had the CDP set up throughout Australia, and he was doing some training for them, and said, "Look, we'd love to have you on." And so I went and did some training out for CDEPs, and then I actually got some work through the Western College of Adult Education at Dubbo, and they were just looking for Aboriginal teachers. So I hadn't finished my degree, but he was, I suppose, could see some potential in me, and so then I started going out to communities, to Indigenous communities, and teaching literacy and numeracy, and really anything, how to use computers, to prepare people for their driver's license, so whatever they needed. And at some communities like Walhollow, I'd stay out at the community. I remember sleeping on the floor in their health centre, and really that's how I got into it. So it was basically being let go at the coffee shop, and an opportunity through connections to do some teaching out in communities in New South Wales. And then once I got my degree, TAFE offered me some teaching. So I've been teaching in adult ed for a long time. And then I had the opportunity to go to Alice Springs in 2018 as a teaching deputy principal at a flexi school. And it was a real eye-opener for me. The school had probably 99% Aboriginal students, and English was about their third language, and who were living culture. Students would often be gone for 3 months at a time through absenteeism, but they were out doing their cultural business. So for me, seeing culture being lived was a real privilege, and I learned so much more than I taught. But so that was a really good, great opportunity. And I suppose what I learned out there and throughout my journey, I wanted to give back, through the academy. And I knew that we needed more voices in the academy, more Black voices. So I was happy to be one of those voices.
And what do you see now as one of the biggest challenges for young Black students in, say, high school settings?
Okay. Yeah, look, I think I won't say things are better, but I think, since my days at school, just an awareness of, and some of the rights of the wrongs that were done by, history and education, some of those have been rectified. And so now students are coming through and seeing that they actually are on Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander lands, and that's part of them as much as and that they belong to that land. So learning about that. So when that's being celebrated, I think for young Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander people going to school, that they feel a lot more accepted than when I went through school. And so I think just having that sense of identity, and that belonging is really important. It's important for any young person, that sense of belonging. So, and for a long time that hasn't been there. But I still think, generally as a society, we still aspects of racism that do rear its ugly head. And, we still need more education. Education still has a big role to play. So for my eldest daughter, who is now a teacher, she just started last year. And she was successful in gaining a Pearl Duncan scholarship. So that is to encourage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to go into teaching in Queensland. So she started out as a primary, year one, group of year one babies. So for some of those young people, seeing an Aboriginal teacher in front of them, I think is really aspirational. But I saw her, and I now see my youngest daughter, who's in year 11 this year. I suppose being really comfortable with who they are and sharing their identity. And I think that's supported by their peers and their colleagues and the school. So I see that being celebrated, which I didn't see when I was going through school.
One of my passion areas has been hoping to also encourage languages to be more taught, the option in schools, and because through language we can bring culture alive and keep it alive for future generations. What do you think are some of the challenges, or should I say obstacles, in having that sort of be kind of a core principle when we're looking at developing the key priority areas for education?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ricky. And I think that language is fundamental to our culture, to it thriving and flourishing, and it being taught and learnt and spoken. So I believe that there's a lot happening now that again wasn't probably 15 years ago. So it's really exciting to see. I think some of the challenges are just the diversity in our culture. We have there's probably there's over 500 language groups, but there's probably thousands of different dialects, and not to mention other valid languages, Pidgin and Aboriginal English, and Creole. So they are all important languages and need to be respected and taught. But that's a challenge, I suppose, for the education systems, is how do they encompass that? And when we see things like national anthems being done in language, or or acknowledgement done in language, I suppose it's, well, whose language do we use? And or if it's in a textbook. So for me, it always comes back to whose country is it on, and being respectful. But I think that's a challenge, just that diversity. But I think it's a good challenge. I think it's really exciting.
And now I want to tell us a little bit about this incredible book that you've partaken about. And absolutely, even better, you've got a copy.
Yeah, I know it probably looks back the front because it's
no, it's great. It's perfect. Indigenous education. So tell us a bit about it, because one of the key areas that I think is important is giving new teachers coming up resources that they can use and take with them into the classroom, especially teachers who are not Indigenous, but they want to at least take the journey of how can I work with the curriculum and ensure that Indigenous voices are represented.
Okay. Where to start? So the book is a great I suppose, example of reconciliation. There are both Indigenous and non-Indigenous authors. So it's about how we can actually work together, walk together to actually talk about Indigenous culture, things like Indigenous languages, pedagogies, different frameworks. So in that respect, it's really good for pre-service teachers, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, because the voices in here are contributed from both. And I can say I taught on the Masters of Education last year, the Masters of Teaching, and so we did a core subject, Indigenous Knowledges and Education, and I use the book every week. So a chapter from the book, you covered the content from our course. So that was for the Masters in Teaching. So I know, and the feedback from the students was, they found it invaluable. They found it accessible. Each chapter has different case studies, so it's applied. And I think, probably, because I've contributed to one of the chapters, a bit biased.
And I'd love to hear more of that, because this is the key thing. When you wrote that chapter and I read about it, I was thinking, oh my God, I wish I'd known about this years ago. Like, how do you, because there's so much out there in terms of so I call it like fractured spaces, and how did you come together to kind of pull what you've did in terms of the selection?
Okay, well, Beth Madsen and I, and Marnie, as Aboriginal people, would often get asked from non-Indigenous educators about finding appropriate resources. And there were some guides out there, through the Queensland education space. We have QCAA, and there's others in the states. But we thought, well, what we wanted was a practical tool that spoke to teachers across a plethora of areas, whether it be mathematics, music, whatever, geography, about embedding Indigenous perspectives. So it's one of the, it's one of the Australian curriculum priority areas. So we wanted to say, well, we want you to address that in an appropriate, respectful way. So we devised a tool. We call it the YARNS tool. And so the YARNS is the acronym to help teachers then. So there's a table in there with the YAR. So what the teachers can look for, pre-service teachers can look for when they're looking for appropriate resources to embed Indigenous perspectives in whatever curriculum area that they're teaching on. So it wasn't saying this isn't well, here are all the resources, because there's plenty of websites on there with those. This is about, well, how do you select those resources? And so the tool is, the tool was designed to, assist educators to actually find appropriate resources to use to embed those perspectives.
And I think I love that idea of that deeper learning as well as a teacher, that we don't just, and this is one thing that sometimes perhaps earlier programs didn't really give us, was that how do you go about to make sure the selections you make are appropriate and reflective for your class and your material? And I love that sort of exemplar that you provide in that table, because it does give, as you said, teachers who aren't Indigenous or all themselves from stolen generation, finding out a way, a framing to kind of start doing it. And I presume, Ren, that once people use this tool, they get better at it. And the beautifulness of it, I would see, is that you can share that resource with other teachers and other students in your classroom. And what I always call, create this shared bubble that, can come together, dare I say the word in the yarning, and share, look what I've got in this resources, whether it's maths or science or phys ed, any curriculum area, to kind of say, well, this is a great resource for 7 and 8s, or this is great for 11 and 12s. Let's try this. This works good with boys, or this works with gender diverse students. So that's wonderful. where to now, Ren, for you? I'm just now wanting to know, where do you see yourself, say, in, say, 5 years' time?
I'll be serious. I was going to be joke and say, Vice Chancellor of Melbourne Uni, but
Yay! Please.
Look, where I see myself is actually still doing the research and working with our mob in communities and actually creating opportunities so we have more voices, contributing to the literature, to the research. I suppose working in that space, those Indigenous research methodology spaces, and just building on that rigor that we already have. And I just so that's where I see myself is working in this space, and then working with other Indigenous academics like yourself, and that I think collaboration is key. I'm really enjoying the journey that I'm on now, and this yarning circle space is a really good space where some great research and some great articles are coming out of. So that's where I see myself, and whether I'd like to, I really enjoy UQ. But who knows, what opportunities are out there. I just love where I'm at, and the people that I'm working with, and then the people I get to meet. I was presenting at a conference up in Townsville, and I was with Dr. John Davis from the Stronger Smarter Institute. So John came and was a guest speaker for us a few years ago. Anyway, so I'm in there, and then Martin Nakata was the keynote, and then so we're waiting for lunch. There was a line up, and so John goes, I don't want to wait. So we went up to this upstairs restaurant, and then he sees Martin, and he goes, hey, Prof, you want to come and join us for lunch? So there I am having lunch with Martin Nakata,
Wow.
And we use him in our courses, one of the theories, and I couldn't speak anyway. And then another keynote was Miriam Rose Ullmer, and in my master's I used Miriam Rose. She was my methodology, and so to meet her, listening to her keynote was like more than what I could fit into a degree. She was so profound, and it was amazing. So just meeting some of these, and then I know, kind of blabbering a bit, but we had an Indigenous writing retreat up at the Sunshine Coast, Gubby Gubby country, and so we had some people. Bronwyn Fredericks, who's our Pro Vice Chancellor, she was running it, and Associate Professor Stephanie Gilbert, and so Professor Tracy Bunder. So we had these amazing scholars helping us to write as emerging scholars, and then the second day I was just going to have breakfast, and there's Professor Eileen Morton Robinson just talking to them, and so I glanced, I saw her, and anyway, so Annie Tracy and Bronwyn, come over here. So they introduced me, and then so we were just yarning. I just introduced myself and who I was, and she said, well, when I was growing up in Stradbroke, I used to babysit your cousins.
Oh, wow.
So she going, Robin and Tracy and Stephen and Brett, and I go, oh my, and this is, Eileen Morton Robinson, and I'm just in awe, like, and I go, and she's just yarning like, I used to babysit them, and and my aunt, she, Auntie Raylene, she said, no, you got to call me Mrs. Gray. It was just really surreal, and I was just having a yarn, and it was amazing. So just those opportunities, and those just those times to yarn with mob, it's amazing.
Oh, Ren, it's been an absolute pleasure, you taking me on this journey, and I'm really hoping everyone that's listening to this really does get something, connects what Ron is saying. Ren is saying, I'm so sorry, I keep thinking calling you Ron, I meant Ren.
I've been called a lot worse, Ricky.
Me too. And we've included the links to your latest article as well to the book. And Ren, if people want to reach out to you, especially up and coming Indigenous scholars, especially if they're doing their PhDs in education, how could they? Is there a media handle or anything? The best way to get in contact with you?
Probably the easiest way is just my email. You've got it, Ricky, and I'm happy
yeah,
to
we can.
share
Yeah,
it, but
we'll put your details to the University of Queensland, and so we have all that. So, and also, it's been an absolute pleasure. We wish the book success, and as I think it goes without a doubt that it's going to be a real top seller in all schools. And I look forward to having some more yarns with you about different topics, because I feel that we could talk so much, but I really wanted the audience to really hear about your work, your incredible work you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing us and really being in the education space and giving us inspiration. I hate that word sometimes, but it is sort of encouraging that, you know what, we can be proud of who we are, and as a teacher make an influence and headway into the Australian curriculum and ensure that we can bring something and take something into the classroom. And I feel that the book that you've co-authored has that. And thank you so much for your time today.
Look, thanks for having me, Ricky, and happy for any of the listeners if they want to contact me through email and have a yarn. So, but yeah, thanks so much for having me, and I'm honored to be here.